Hi, Mike Harrington here today, and thanks again for taking time to listen in to our sessions on building a successful business, the principles that we need in order to build an exceptional business. So, we're going to start drilling down again more today on a very important topic, but I wanted to just give you a little something about what this session is going to be about. It's really success. How do you build success into your business? And I want to remind you about a verse that I use as a life verse that I mentioned earlier in one of the sessions. It's Joshua 1:8. It says, "Keep this book of law always on your lips," Bible. Meditate on it day and night, and do everything in it, and you will be prosperous and successful. So this is basically a promise of God saying that, hey, listen, if you focus on this and you meditate on it and you listen to it and you take the wisdom that I'm going to give you in it, then you'll be successful. I don't, when people ask me, well, you've had some degree of success. How are you successful? I tell them very quickly that God gave me the success I had. There's nothing special about me. I came from a very poor background. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. None of those things that maybe you look at as where success comes from. Most people that you're going to see in business are successful because of their effort. And I will tell you that I'm successful because of not my own effort. I worked hard and I did the things I was supposed to do, but I relied on God for direction. And this verse was one that I quoted to people when they said, "Hey, how can you be successful?" So we're going to talk today about how you focus on the various parts of your business. We're going to drill down even further into the STAR model. And again, success is really your effort, but it's really God's plan for your life. So I would suggest if you haven't got a plan that God gave you, spend some time talking to Him and He'll give you one. In today's session, we're going to talk about metrics. We talked a little bit about each of the various parts of the STAR model in our previous sessions, but I'm going to drill down on metrics today. And I just want to start by saying that it's not only important how the tools you have in place to measure your success, but what are you measuring as your success? And I'm going to spend a little time on personal and tell you a little bit about my own personal story on focusing on the wrong things. Because guys, we tend to do that from time to time. So I want to take just a few minutes to talk about what do you think is important in your life? What are you focusing on? Are you focusing on how many cars you can buy, how much money you can amass, what your real estate holdings look like? What are you spending time on? What are you spending your life pursuing? And I will tell you that if you're not spending your life pursuing those things that are more important than those, like your family and your faith, your friends, all those relationships that you should be building, then you're probably focusing on the wrong metric. So today we're going to talk about what is the right metric for business, and then the tools you'll need for making sure that those metrics are being carried out to the extent that you want. So, I would advise you to take a little time today as we go into this session and refocus on what's important to you. What are your metrics? How healthy is your marriage? What time are you spending with your children? What's your relationship with God? Those are all metrics that are far more important than any metric I'm going to talk about today in this session. So I would encourage you to go back and take a look at those areas as you look at what you're focusing on. So I always told people that work with me that those were far more important than any of the metrics that we're going to talk about here today. But we are going to talk about metrics and how important they are to the business. And as we looked at businesses to buy, I always told people, find out what they're measuring today. Because when you walk into a business and you look at the business and you say, they're focused on measuring this. And then when you look at what this is in relation to profit or things that they were trying to do with the business, it really had no bearing on it. And so you'll find as you walk into new businesses where you're trying to get them back on track, or you're building a business, that you really need to focus in this area for some time to make sure the metrics that you've got are the right metrics to focus on. So let me just talk about what are some of the key ingredients to a good metric system if you're in a business. Well, first of all, revenue growth. Sometimes we get so focused on profit that we cut out things that can help us grow the business. I have no axe to grind against accountants, but accountants sometimes would focus on, well, let's figure the profitability on this. And I always told people, I said, listen, You can't cut your way to greatness. If you've got an accountant that's running the business or is trying to run the business and saying, hey, we need to cut costs here and here and here, yet you're trying to build a business, you need to be focused on something different. The metric here is revenue growth. What's the growth rate of this business? Is the top line contributing to in such a way that you're going to continue to build the business and grow the business? I hope so. Next thing is profit margin. There were a lot of things that we spent time on in business that did not deliver any profit to the bottom line, or took a lot of resources from other projects and other things that we were working on that didn't deliver any profit. And so you need to begin to focus on the profit, not in general, because sometimes these things are hidden in the general profit line. You need to focus on individual profit margins for each product or service in your business. You need to make sure that those things that you're spending your time on and having your organization spend time on are profitable. Next is the cost of acquisition. The cost of acquisition is a good metric to measure because it tells you how much it costs to get a customer on board. Now, I'll give you a good example. I consulted with a tire company locally by the name of Hobbs Tire. And Gary Hobbs was the owner. And Gary would always tell me, oh, I've got this new big account. And I would ask Gary who it was, and he would say, well, it's a local utility, which happened to be called Pedernales Electric. So Gary would tell me how excited he was that he got this big new account. And I said, that's great. I said, how fast do they pay? He goes, oh, what do you mean? I said, well, when you sell them a tire, one, what's the profit margin on that tire? And two, how fast do they pay? He goes, well, these are really large truck tires, and they have a contract where I don't make a lot of money on each tire, and they pay me 60 days later. I said, well, Gary, that's not a good customer acquisition strategy. You want people like me who need to buy a tire today that will pay a reasonable amount for the tire and who will give you a credit card and pay for it today. So Gary, unknowingly, because he thought he was getting a big customer, was beginning to put himself in a situation where his customer acquisition was focused on the wrong thing. He was going out acquiring large commercial accounts, which are long, that pay in 60 to 90 days, which were his least profitable customers. And I said, Gary, you got to be focused on customer acquisition of those things that are more profitable to you. Then you look at your customer retention rate. What is a metric? Well, if you've got customers coming in the door and then leaving and never buying from you again, your customer retention rate is suffering. And so what you've got to begin to do is to take a look at what are those customers doing for you. And I always looked at the lifetime value of a customer. For example, in my lodging business at Hillside Acres, I've got customers that have been with me for over 10 years. In fact, 40% of my business is retained customers, people that have been there before that are now coming back. So you need to begin to look at, okay, customers are coming into the franchise. Are they staying with us? Are they liking the service or product that we provide? And are they staying long term? So the customer retention rate is really very important. I mentioned before lifetime value of a customer. Let's say you had a customer that came into your store one time and they bought one product and it was $10. And you thought, well, that's good. I need that customer too. But what if that customer came into your store every month and bought that product plus other products? And now what you begin to look at is the lifetime value of that customer. How is he adding to the long-term effect and growth of your business? So what you want to do is to retain your customers and make sure that they're coming back into the franchise and buying more, and that you're providing the level of service that they want. The other thing is on the metric side is what's your cash flow? I always told people, listen, and this go back to Gary as my example. I said, Gary, your cash flow needs to run your business day by day. You need to have cash coming in. And if you're waiting for 60 or 90 days to get your cash in the door, you're not going to be successful long term because you're not going to be around. That guy who's going to pay you 90 days from now is not going to pay your employee today when his paycheck's due. You're going to be in a situation where you don't have good cash flow. So cash flow is an important metric in any business. The other thing I measure is employee productivity. For example, I'm on a board of a local senior citizens center. And what I look at there is the productivity of employees. So if we've got X number of, let's just say we had, for example, we had 10 employees and the sales were $1,000. Well, that's $100 per employee. So now let's say that we want to add an employee. and you take that and you divide it into the same top line number, you're going to have less employee productivity than you did before when you had 10. Now you've got 11 into 1,000. So what I try to tell the people there is that as we add new employees, and you should look at your business this way, are they overhead employees? Are they revenue producing employees? And make sure that when you add new employees that the employee productivity, which should be measured across your whole business, is going up instead of down. The other thing you need to do and measure is your market share. If you're number one in the market, I always tell people if you're number one in the market, the only place you can go is down. And you don't want to go down. You want to be number one. Well, it takes a lot of effort on the part of your organization and measurement on your part to make sure that you continue to be number one in your market share. So make sure that your market share continues to be right up there. And lots of ways that you can measure that. I mean, there's industry measures, there's, internal measures, all kinds of measures that you can make in order for you to maintain your market share. The next thing is same store sales. One of the things that we focused on at Jackson Hewitt was not only do you have a store, let's say they did, 50,000 last year. Are they on track to do 60,000 this year or 70,000? If your same store sales was staying stagnant, you weren't growing the business the way we wanted you to, and you weren't growing the business the way you wanted to. As a franchisee, you want to make sure you were making good profit. You can't make good profit if you're adding new employees and paying them a little bit more this year unless you're growing the top line. So same-store sales was very important. And as we got into discussions with the finance people, the investors, that was one of their key measurements. They always wanted to know, okay, it's good that you've got new stores, but what about your same-store sales? How are you doing in growing your same-store sales? Making sure that those stores that you already have open are more productive. Next thing you look at and next thing you measure is employee retention. If you want to make sure your employees are able to do the job long-term, when you've invested in an employee and you've trained them and you've spent time on them and you've given them resources, you want to make sure that your employee retention is very good. So if you've got a high turnover, let's say that you've got a turnover of 40% of your employees. One, as I mentioned before, those employees that you turn over are likely going to take 6 months to replace by the time you get them out the door and then get a new person in, recruit them, train them, so on. So your employee retention is really a great measure of how you're doing as an organization. So employee retention is really important. And the other thing you want to look at, particularly when you're launching any new product, is what is the break-even point for that product. A lot of times we launch these products, they sort of get lost in the mix, and we keep feeding them and we keep spending resources on them and talent on them, but they didn't get to the break-even point. So every product you launch and every product you have in your portfolio should be well past the break-even point. New products, we allow them a little time to get to the point where they get to break-even, but beyond that, you make sure that they're going to be making money for your organization long term. Next thing you want to look at is average order value. What is the average order? Let's say that in the restaurant industry they call it average. I guess it's average plate price or whatever. What's your average service? And so if your waitresses and waiters, for example, are selling on average $30 for food, what you might want to do is measure, well, what are they selling adjacent? What are they selling as far as appetizers? What are they selling as far as desserts? And you might want to measure that and make sure that their productivity is going up all the time instead of staying the same. The other thing you want to look at is sales conversion. We have a certain number of leads that we got in for any product or service that we sold at both Western Union and Jackson Hewitt. And I also have that in the lodging business. A certain number of people will do what I call kicking tires. They'll come in, they'll say, I wonder if this is a place I want to stay. We're across the street from a wedding venue, so people have a chance to look at us plus others. And what we need to measure as an organization, and I don't know what the things are for your organization you need to measure, but has to do with the people that kicked the tire that actually placed an order. And if you find a lot of people are kicking tires and nobody ever places the order, well, then there's probably something wrong with the way you acquire customers. So you need to measure that. You need to make sure that those people that are coming out to look at your product or maybe testing your product are actually users. A lot of strategy online today where they give you a trial of 30 days or 60 days or whatever. And then you begin to say, oh, well, this is really a good product. I'm glad I got it. And then you will convert to being a full-time customer. So things to remember in this area in as far as metrics. The old saying is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So you need to make sure that you are measuring the right things, that you've got the right systems in place to measure those things that are important to your business. And as I said before, don't just measure your business, measure your personal success. Measure how you're doing with your family, your faith, your friends. I mean, those are important things to measure. I think as guys, and I'll just speak from a guy's perspective, we tend to focus on the next shiny thing. We tend to focus on, okay, if I did this, I got to do this next. I think what we need to do is step back and say, what are the relationships in my life that are most important to measure? And then going back to the business again, as I said before, those things in life that are really far more important than your job, your faith, your family, your friends, those kinds of things. So don't lose sight of that when you start beginning to measure your business. Measure the things in your life that are really important. So we've talked a lot today about picking the right metrics for your business, making sure that you measure the right things. There were people that were, as I said, when I looked at companies to buy, they were focused on things that had no bearing on their profitability or on their sales. And so important that you make sure that you've got the right things in your business that you're measuring. And then last but not least, make sure the whole organization knows how you're doing. I instituted a monthly meeting at Jackson Hewitt where everybody in the organization saw how we were doing against our numbers. They were important to me, and I wanted to be important to them. So they knew if we were making our numbers, if we were on profit goals, if we were on revenue goals, if we had achieved the right number of franchisees that we had acquired that month. And so it's important that you not only put all the metrics in place you want to measure, but make sure that your whole organization knows exactly what you're up to. So remember what I said earlier, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I want to give you just one final example of somebody that was focused on the wrong metric. I said, remember, it's important the tools you use for measuring things, but it's also important to know what you're measuring and why. I'll give you the airlines. Several years ago, multiple years ago, when I was growing up, well, there were always airline crashes, several airline crashes around the world. And so the airlines were focused on building market share and competing against each other, but they got together and they said, hey, listen, one of the things we need to measure is the safety of our airline. We need to be known as the safest way to travel. And today they are. You're in an airline, you're in one of the safest ways to travel. So they began to measure the mean time between crashes. And their goal collectively was to just get it down to almost nothing. And today you rarely hear of an airline crash. I mean, there's some terrible storm or something that'll cause an airline to go down. But all across the world, they looked at, okay, how can we focus on this one thing called safety and measure it so that we can all benefit from it and share information rather than keep it to ourselves. And so I would just tell you that make sure you know what you're measuring and why you're measuring it, because sometimes when you get into companies, and I looked at several, that they were measuring something and I'm going, why are we doing that? Why are we measuring that? So don't forget, measuring and metrics are critical to mission success. That concludes today's session on metrics.